call upon our first keynote speaker, Dr. Andrew Brown. It's really early in the morning for him, and he's been waiting with us patiently for more than an hour now. Thank you, Andrew, for
Thank
joining
you.
us early morning. It is very necessary for us to know about a little about him. He is a system thinking and system dynamics expert in software development. He comes with around 25 years of experience. He is an independent test consultant. He's also an author of a book on tech debt. I think it's called Taming Your Dragon. Today, Andrew will be delivering a keynote session, Taming Your Dragon, which is addressing about technical debt beast. A very warm welcome to you, Andrew.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, right. Uh, are we starting? Can I share now?
Yes, please.
Okay, right. So hopefully you can see my screen.
Yes, Andrew.
Okay, terrific. Great. So I'll start off. So thanks for inviting me along today. I'm really pleased to be here at the Global Testing Retreat. So my name's Andy Brown, and I'm going to be talking about what I was researching in my book there, Taming Your Dragon, which is all about addressing your technical debt beast. But before then, I'd like to actually sort of pose a question or a problem to you, actually, which is as follows. Say that I gave you two options. So option A would be as follows. There's a table there, and there's €2 on the table, or whatever currency you have in your country, and you can just walk up to the table and take the €2 off. Okay, entirely risk-free. Just walk up and take it off. That's option A. Option B is a little more involved. So you have to throw two dice, and you have to throw a 7 or a 12. Now, if you throw a 7 or a 12, you will win €9. Okay. However, if you don't throw a 7 or a 12, you'd have to pay me 5 cents. So, okay, the question that I would ask everybody, and we're not going to be able to get answers from everybody, is whether you would choose option A or option B. So if we just think about that for a second, option A or option B. Okay, so if I tell you that actually most people would choose option B, just over about 60% of people would choose option B there. Okay, but say I hadn't given you that option. Say I'd given you slightly different options there, or a slightly different choice. So when you came in the room, option A was exactly the same still. Okay, it's just risk-free. You walk up to the table, you take €2 off. Option B, though, is slightly different. You still have to throw the dice, and you still have to throw a 7 or a 12. And if you throw a 7 or a 12, you still get €9. Okay. However, the lose condition is different. Now, if you don't throw a 7 or a 12, instead of paying me 5 cents, you don't pay me anything. So it's entirely, there's no loss or downside. Okay. So slightly different there, no loss. Now, under these circumstances, you can see in the no loss condition, the gamble is a much better bet. Okay. And so we'd expect more people to take it. But the question is, how much difference would it make? Because how much would that 5 cents make? Because 5 cents in €9 is a very small amount. But going from 5 cents to zero could be important. So the question would be, how would it change it there? And would it make a big difference? And actually the answer is as follows. It would make an enormous difference and in entirely an unexpected direction. So it makes an enormous difference, and it's an astonishing result because instead of making the gamble more attractive by removing that 5 cents loss, it's become a whole lot less attractive. So, and that's a really very astonishing thing there. So you take it away, there's no downside now, and all of a sudden it's not attractive. So Although this is an interesting result, the question is, why is it important? And the reason it's important is it's highly relevant to technical debt. And the reason is as follows, that technical debt, it's not a technical problem. We might think it is, and it's even got technical in the title there, but it's not really a technical problem in the sense of if you want to solve it. Primarily, it's a problem around trade-offs. Because nobody takes on technical debt just for the fun of it. We take it on as a trade-off for doing something else that we want to do that's more important to us, like early delivery or additional features. So I go into quite a few different companies and we talk about their technical debt problems. And often they will say, we have too much technical debt. But then you've got to ask really, well, what do they mean by too much technical debt? If all that technical debt is a consequence of a trade-off, well, what it really means then is that they've made trade-offs which they now regret. So that's what it is there. So the question is, how do we make trade-off decisions? And what's this got to do with our gambling problem? Well, this here, that's a trade-off decision. You're trading off risk against reward. And this is also a trade-off decision, but we get a completely unexpected result. And so that means we don't really understand how we make trade-offs. So the question is then, how indeed do we make trade-offs? And actually the answer is we use our emotions. When we're making decisions, and trade-off decisions is a decision there, we use our emotions. So Um, I've got two daughters, and my elder daughter at one stage, she owned 35 pairs of shoes. Now, I couldn't understand this because she does not do 35 times as much walking as I do. But nevertheless, she's got 35 pairs of shoes. Now, what this is showing you is if you take too much emotion into a decision, or a shoe shop in her case, or you take the wrong kind of emotion, you end up making the wrong kinds of decisions, or you make poor decisions. Now, I can see that there's kind of a few of the guys are kind of smiling and nodding there, and they say, "Yeah, my wife, my girlfriend's the same." Okay, guys, we are every bit as bad. Okay, and in fact, we're worse because that costs a lot more than 35 pairs of shoes. So the question would be then, if by taking too much emotion or the wrong kind of emotion into a decision, we make bad decisions, what would happen if we removed emotion from our decision making? Would we make really good decisions? And actually, the person who can answer that is a guy called Antonio Damasio. This is his book there, Descartes' Error. And actually, his answer is you will make terrible decisions. Because one of the things he did was in his book there, he reported on some studies of people with brain injury. So actually, on the front cover of his book, that's a picture of a brain. There's the eyeball, and these people, they had brain injuries around this area here. It's the prefrontal cortex of your brain. And what they found with these patients was that they seemed perfectly normal in many ways. They were perfectly intelligible, perfectly intelligent. They could they sort of could understand things, remember things, and everything like that. See, they seemed perfectly normal. The only thing that was really different about them was they made absolutely terrible decisions. And when they researched and dug into this, essentially the reason was that the damage that they had to their prefrontal cortex meant that they could not connect the emotions that they were going to feel about the consequence of making a decision. They couldn't connect it with the decision they're about to make. So they couldn't use their emotions to guide their decision making. And then they ended up making terrible decisions. So if we use emotions to make our decisions, the question then is going to be, what are the emotions that are going to affect our technical debt trade-off? And so if we look at what are the characteristics of the new delivery, the early delivery or the new features against the characteristics of technical debt. Well, if we look at the characteristics of the new feature, we can see It's going to be immediate. We get it straight away. It's also going to be certain. We're either going to get it or we're not. And it's going to be concrete as well, or as concrete as anything ever gets in software. And so you can see that those characteristics, they are going to appeal to our emotions. But what about the characteristics of technical debt? Well, technical debt is going to occur sometime in the future, but it's going to be uncertain. We don't know when it's going to occur. We don't know what we're going to have to repay with that debt. And it's also going to be somewhat intangible. We don't know what it is. So we can see if we're making a decision, those characteristics, they may well appeal strongly to our rationality, but they won't appeal to our emotions. And because these characteristics don't appeal to our emotions, when we do that trade-off, technical debt loses out. So the question is there a lesson of a similar parallel situation that we could learn from? And actually, the answer is yes. And it's smoking, and particularly the uptake of smoking by adolescents and teenagers. So most of our governments, the UK included there, many decades ago, they realised that smoking was bad for their health of the population, and it was bad for the taxpayer because they were paying lots of healthcare. So they wanted to cut back on smoking, and so they wanted to put warning, and they decided they would put warning messages on the cigarette packets. Now, the tobacco manufacturers, they fiercely resisted this, but they might as well have not bothered because actually, when you look at the warning that's on there, it's talking about future risks, potential risks to your health there, and it will name some diseases there. So the warning message is appealing very strongly to your logic and your rationality about if you do this sometime in the future, this bad thing may happen, a bit like technical debt. But it doesn't appeal to your emotion. In the meantime, if you look at, well, what are the tobacco manufacturers doing at that time? And you can see they are screaming out a very, very loud message to your emotions there. Smoke a cigarette and you can be a sexy cowboy and attract all the women. And so you can see in this battle of logic against emotions, the tobacco manufacturers were winning for decades. Of course, it's changed in many places now. So in the UK, for example, you can't get a cigarette packet that looks like this. All cigarette packets are generically branded there. They all look pretty much the same. So the tobacco manufacturers cannot appeal to your emotions. And what's more, the health authorities have realised the importance of appealing to emotions. So although they've still got the warning there, appealing to your logic, they've also added in some very graphic images of body parts which have been damaged by smoking. So they're appealing to your very strongly to your emotions there. Now, this isn't the only thing that's affected things, but it is one of the things that's contributing to reduction in smoking in many countries. So, what's the implications for technical debt then? The answer is if you want to change the amount of technical debt, you need to appeal to emotions in that decision making. And I talk about this in my book, and there's several ways you can do it. So one is you can use a story or a narrative. You can talk things through there. You could go away, understand that gambling task, and understand why that 5 cents becomes so important there. You can use things called Ulysses contracts, or you can use things such as making decisions in a simultaneous manner rather than sequentially. Now, emotions is probably the most important thing in technical debt decisions, but it's not the only thing because very often people they'll know what the best option is and they know that it's bad piling up this technical debt, but they're constrained by their role in the system. So, for example, a project manager, he may know that delivering this with all this technical debt is going to be bad, but they have to deliver it on time, and that's what they're being measured by. Or perhaps a product manager, they know that actually this technical debt they're adding is bad, but they are being pressured to squeeze in an extra feature or so. So this is an important thing. When we make decisions, we don't make decisions as an individual, a free individual. We make decisions as occupying a role within a system. And that influences our decisions. So therefore, we need to understand how we make decisions in a system. Now, in my book, then I then sort of talk about multiple things. So I talk about all these different layers. So I've talked about the trade-off layer there, where it's affected by emotions, and then there's this systems layer, and then there where the influence of systems come in, and then there's some other layers as well. So the question is, of course, how much do we know about systems? And of course, in IT, we actually know a fair bit, or so we think. Pretty well every software project you are working on software for a software system there. And if you're putting in something like an ERP system, there'll be someone on the team that's thinking about the problem from a systems point of view. But there's more than one system involved. So if you're putting in a big system like this, there's the system itself that's been put in. But in addition, there's also the system, organizational system, which involves the team and the stakeholders. Now, there's a critical difference between, oh, there's several differences, but there's two important ones between IT systems and social systems. And that is that in a social system, subsystems, they can determine their own goals and decide what they're going to do. Yeah. This can lead to conflict there between different subsystems like developers and so on there. And it can lead to unintended consequences, which we'll see on the next slide. The second problem that we've got is that we don't understand the dynamics of any systems, let alone social systems, where the things will change as a result of what's happening in that system over time. But let's go back to that conflict and unintended consequences of subsystems determining their own goals. So in the early 20th century, there was a big problem in a lot of countries of high levels and increasing levels of drinking. And this was causing lots of problems in those countries. And so a lot of governments wanted to tackle this problem. And the United States, they decided they would tackle this problem by simply banning alcohol. So bringing in what was prohibition. But there was a problem with this. When they brought in prohibition, they didn't really think about the system within which alcohol was produced and consumed. So what did this system look like? Well, at a very simple level, it looked as follows. You've got a consumer and they want to consume alcohol. And then you've got a bar owner that will supply alcohol and they'll get that alcohol from a brewery or a distillery and there's an exchange of money there. And then what happened was, of course, prohibition comes along and all of this disappears, apart from the consumer who still wants to consume alcohol. So at this point, what is it that happens? Well, a couple of things happen. This is one thing that happened. So is this when the Americans discovered religion? Actually, no, it's not. What they discovered was a loophole, which was that communion wine was exempt from it there. So you can imagine what happened to sales of communion wine. Another loophole was that if you were having a meal and there was a rabbi present at the meal, you were allowed to serve wine. So all of a sudden, the rabbi finds himself a whole lot more popular. But perhaps the biggest loophole was it was still perfectly legal to prescribe alcohol for medicinal purposes. So you can imagine what happened to prescriptions. However, even with these loopholes, there wasn't enough to satisfy the demand from consumers. So when that disappeared. So what happened next? Well, if you've done any economics at all, you will know that if you've done Economics 101, if you have a demand for something and the supply is removed, something will rapidly come in and substitute that supply. And that's precisely what happened. So organized crime came in and actually started supplying alcohol. Or actually, what happened was criminals came in, started supplying alcohol, and became organized. Because before this, criminals weren't so organized as they were then. So what happened was, as a result of prohibition, they got the biggest unintended consequence was the long-term growth of the mafia and other organized crime organizations in the United States, and they're still there today. That's the first problem there. I talked about that second problem of we don't really understand the dynamics of social systems. And that's because we're not mentally equipped to evaluate complex systems. And I'll show this with a simple example. Imagine you had a lily pond and there's one lily plant in it, but it's a very fast lily plant growing. And every day it doubles its coverage of the pond. And after 100 days, the pond is 100% covered. And the question would be, how many days does it take to cover a quarter of the pond? Is it 25 days, 50 days, 75 days, 90, 98 days? And actually, the answer is 98 days. And most of us wouldn't get that answer right. And that's because we're not equipped. Evolution hasn't equipped us to deal with complex problems like this. We haven't had to face problems that have got reinforcing loops, balancing loops, and so on there in our past there. So although we cannot do it mentally, actually we can use models to do this for us. Um, and this is what I did in my book. So, and I'll give an example here of modeling for COVID. So most of us will remember COVID. It was a big pandemic that was worldwide about 5 years ago, and it spread very quickly. And governments all around the world were getting very worried about it. And they had lots of questions they wanted answers to. How fast is it going to spread? How many people are going to become ill? How much do we need? And essentially, they wanted to know, what can we do and what are going to be the consequences if we make these different choices? So what they did was they then turned to models, and they got usually universities or so to build models of it. Now, this is a very simple model of an infectious disease there. It's called the SIR model. So you have a susceptible population, people that can get the disease, an infectious population, so people who've got the disease and can spread it, and then recovered population there of people who've had the disease and they're no longer infectious. Um, and so in this fairly simple model, you've got some other things. So you've got some controls like a contact rate, how often people meet each other. And the governments, they can control that, perhaps with lockdown rules. And how contagious is the disease? And they've got some control over that. Perhaps they can control it a bit with masking, social distancing. Now, a more sophisticated model is going to have lots of more additions in there. Okay, you're going to want to try out, well, what's the consequence of a vaccination program and so on. But you can add those bits in. And so you build a model like this. And actually, I've built this model here. This is it here. And you can actually see it running now, a very simple model. So you click there, it starts the run, and I can control the number of contacts per day. And so if you set it to say 3.5 contacts per day, so every day you meet 3.5 people, you'll see that in this population of 10,000, it peaks at 22 days at about 600 people a day getting the disease. And eventually about 70% of the population get it. However, if you change it to 8 contacts a day, you see the infection rate, it peaks much earlier, it peaks much higher, and in the end, everybody gets the disease. So you can see with models like this, you can then try out different types of policy and see how they work before the disease hits you. And this is what our countries did. And so for our country in the United Kingdom, we decided as a result of that, we were going to have a very strict lockdown. So in a population of 70 million or 60, 70 million there, we had a complete lockdown with only 5 exceptions. So what were those exceptions? Well, Boris likes a party, so he obviously had a party at his house. The leader of the opposition decides, well, if Boris is going to have a party, I'm going to go down the pub and have a beer and curry with my mates. The chief advisor to the uh, um, prime minister, he decides to visit the opticians 300 kilometers away. This guy here, he's from my old college, actually, Imperial College. he did all the modeling for the government. He decided to visit his mistress, a married woman, twice during the lockdown. And then we had some more fun and games from the Minister of Health. And you might ask, well, what sort of fun and games were those at number 10? And well, we can answer that question by actually, he had his fun and games unknown to him on CCTV. So you got to feel sorry for the couple there. They think that they're sort of having a sort of a quiet sort of kiss and cuddle and a little affair, and they end up on national TV there. So the thing is, if you can model COVID, you can model pretty well anything, including a software process, which is what I did in my book. So I built a model of a software process here, and essentially what happens is you pile up some work, and then the work gets accomplished, but sometimes some of the work is done wrong and it has to be redone. And then I've got a little bit there which actually you can you can actually avoid doing the work by just creating it as technical debt. And so I built that simulation, I built a dashboard for it, and then this is it running here actually. So what it's got is I built it so that it was three projects, and project one feeds into project two and then project three. And what you can do is you can control the amount of technical debt that you create in project one. And if you do that and you add in some technical debt, you can get the first project to deliver earlier and a lot cheaper. So you're saving about £1.5 million. But what you find is there you can model it so that then the total cost for all three projects then actually increases. So you can do modeling like this. And this is what I do in the book, and I show the consequence of technical debt. So those are some of the main parts there. There's some other considerations for technical debt though. You can use those models to explore anti-patterns. You can also bring in lessons from economics as well, because there's lots of problems that economics have studied and explored that are very similar to our problems here in software. You need to understand about wicked and tame problems, and technical debt's a wicked problem, and you need to understand the consequences of that. And then I talk about creating some workshops to create a sustainable solution there. So in summary, technical debt, it's not a technical problem, not primarily. It's a problem around trade-offs. And it's a problem around trade-offs that are being made by people that are working inside systems. And by working inside a system, their decisions are influenced by that system. So we need to understand how our mind makes a trade-off, how being inside a system influences how we make a decision. Now, this is a significant and it's a widespread problem, but we can address it with a targeted approach. So thank you very much for listening to me. If you're interested or in learning more about it, please do contact me. There's my email and that's my LinkedIn address. Um, Now, I've been through a lot of things very quickly, and there's probably I expose you to a lot of ideas that you may not have seen before. So I'm sure that you're going to have lots and lots of questions. So please now do ask me whatever questions you would like. So I'm looking forward to questions. Thank you.
Audience participants, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. We'll take it with Andrew. But Andrew, there's another question that I would want to
Yeah.
ask. So when we say technical debts, there will be a lot of things that gets added onto that whole bunch, right? How do you think we can prioritize? What What are the techniques that you would suggest to prioritize that?
What for your technical debt? Um,
Mhm.
Okay, so I guess actually you might want to you might want to take a little step back from there, which is that this is kind of very much the approach which people we take is we have this technical debt, how do we address it? Um, and yeah, you can prioritize it there, but actually really what you should be doing before that, and this is where you need to involve your stakeholders, is actually technical debt is constantly being created and destroyed all of the time. And what you really want to be doing is influencing the bit at where it's being created there. So actually, less of it gets created. Um, and that's the bit to tackle there. The difficulty is if you prioritize it there and you get rid of technical debt, within a few months, you will have technical debt will be back because the organization, the way that it runs is usually with all of our projects, they overrun because we underestimate there. And there's various reasons for that. So when it comes to that big panic at the end, then the only way we can easily get ourselves out of a hole is by putting stuff as technical debt. If at all possible, that's where you need to address the problem there in the creation rather than the prioritization. But again, but you are right. There are some areas of prioritization, and I talk a bit about this in the book. And one of the things you want to think about is interest rate. So
Hmm.
you've got, you would know that if you had two loans and one was say a loan with on your credit card and it was a very high interest rate and you had a loan on your bank which was much lower, you'd pay off the credit card first. And so there's a similar thing with technical debt there, in that there's some technical debt which becomes rapidly becomes very expensive. And it's things that where you make a decision which it's difficult to go back on there. And it's very difficult to undo. And so those are the ones that you want to be looking at and addressing first. Has that answered your question?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Uh,
great.
a carryover question on that. Would you be suggesting any metrics or any efficiencies as to how we can measure the technical debts?
Um, okay, I've got a, like a lot of people, I've got a very mixed attitude towards metrics actually, and I think they can be useful, but they can also be very dangerous. Um, and actually, that's another t talk I actually give about metrics there and the dangers of metrics. Um, I would I would say that in terms of metrics, I would say first of all try and understand your problem of where the technical debt is being created there, and firstly it may be where it's being created in terms of your organization. Is it being created as a result of you've got inadequate analysis, or is it being created at the development stage when the developers are having to work perhaps too quickly? So is it analysis, is it development there? You could look at it like that. You could also look at it in where it's created, and often in this project stage, and often you will find that technical debt is disproportionately created when the project's running over it's behind schedule. Once the project's behind schedule, then all bets are off around technical debt there. And so that will perhaps give you some clues of where to be looking to address your technical debt in terms of avoiding getting it in the first place.
Mhm.
Thank you.
We have a question from Soumya. She's asking, in your view, if there has been a shift in perception of technical debt over times in software development world. Has it improved or has it worsened?
Um, I think the amount of technical debt has increased and it's worsened. Yeah. Um, but I think our awareness, certainly our awareness of technical debt has improved. So we're more aware of it. We're more aware of the consequences of it. And so we're more willing to try and do things about it. I think the reason we've got more technical debt is that simply there is so much more technical stuff there. There's more technical debt. Um, I think one thing that is going to actually make technical debt an awful lot worse, though, is AI. And you have AI and you have vibe coding, and all of a sudden you have people who really shouldn't be creating code are actually creating code, and they're creating enormous amounts of technical debt. Now, it's perhaps it's going to be okay if you can then create some more vibe coding, which will get you out of the hole you've just been in there. So you just go from hole to hole to hole. But I can certainly see that there's a potential for AI to the consequences of that to be that there's going to be an enormous increase in technical debt, which is going to catch some organizations out.
Okay, you answered her second part as well. She had this. If do you think if AI or data-driven approach might improve it? But Soumya, I think that answered your question. Kaustav also has the same. Continuing it on the AI lines, does the
Mhm.
use of AI-based test generation, which is hype these days, introduce new forms of debt?
I think it will introduce new forms of debt. We're probably not aware. Probably the biggest increase in debt that AI brings along, we're probably not aware of it. It's going to be something that we, the biggest problems that we have are usually problems that we don't even know we have yet. We're into
Mhm.
that Donald Rumsfeld, the unknown unknowns. We don't know what we don't know. So I think that's it there. It could well be that AI could dig us out of some holes in that it could reduce the technical debt if it was if you focused your AI and gave it a problem to solve there. However, I suspect that's not a very sexy use of AI, and I suspect that won't be interest that won't attract a lot of interest, but it would be a potential there, yeah.
Okay. This is my question again. In our daily software development, it becomes a task to accommodate technical debt as a part of our deliveries. Would you have any ways how we can show the implications of a technical debt to the stakeholders?
Um, Yeah, so I would say there again it's back to the emotions, because you can you can show it there with figures and graphs and so on, but they're not really going to touch people there. Um, if you give it in stories, for example, then they can relate to the story, and in particular, if you can relate it to something that's happened in the past on that is relevant to them, say s- some decision that was made on the system that you're now working on that's given some consequences, which now mean that when they came to try and do something else, all of a sudden it was a whole lot more expensive or difficult or perhaps not even possible. Then you can, then they're more likely to be listening to you. So it's very much attaching it to emotions. The other potential thing may be and I talked about sequential versus so simultaneous versus sequential decisions. If you're making decisions about a trade-off around technical debt, if you make them one at a time, then you will always go, or whoever's making those decisions, they will always go for let's pile up some technical debt.
Mhm.
However, if you make all these decisions together, it then becomes more difficult then for every single one of those decisions to make technical debt. The analogy here is, I don't know if you work at a company and you've got a staff canteen and you go in and you decide, right, I'm going to eat healthily, for one, at least 1 or 2 days this week. I'm not going to go for the burger and the chips and the fried food there. I'm going to have a salad. If every day that you go into the restaurant, you make the decision on that day, every day you will go for the comfort food. If you at the start of the week you say, right, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, which I'll decide all my meals for the whole week on that day, then you would be more likely to put in a salad on 1 or 2 of those days there. So if you can bunch your decisions together on that, then you will get a more balanced thing around the technical debt, if that's possible.
Okay. Okay. Maybe a last one for the day. Do
Mhm.
you think accumulation of a lot of technical debt does it boost the productivity of a developer, or will it improve the morale? How does it work? Because we are talking a lot about emotions. How does it work about the morale?
Actually, I'd never specifically. That's a very interesting question, very good question. I hadn't, although I've thought a lot about technical debt, I'd never thought specifically about the morale. Um, and here I can think, if I think back to my days at when I worked at HMV, I can see it working both ways. There's the givers and the receivers, and I remember there was some highly productive programmers, or they appeared to be highly productive to the management there, but basically they were highly productive because they were just piling up loads of technical debt. And they were never going to deal with that technical debt. So actually, technical debt for them was great. It got them out of a hole that they didn't have to do. And then you had the poor old people that were in live support. They ended up having to deal with that technical debt. And for them, it was actually very soul destroying and draining because they came to this problem. They could see there was this technical debt, but they couldn't necessarily solve it because there was another piece over here where another decision had been made that was preventing them doing that solution. And so it was the whole can of worms. They were pulling lots and lots of things out. So for those that are creating technical debt, it's a boost. Yeah, it will improve your morale. For the poor suckers that are having to deal with it, it's going to be mostly it's going to be a drain on your morale there, I would say. Yeah.
Okay. Some follow-up questions on what we were discussing, Andrew. What incentives can encourage engineers to tackle technical debt very proactively, especially because this is more of a testing community? Would you have any specific suggestions?
Right, incentives there for all of this stuff, and for the technical people and the testers, in some ways, it is you're only ever going to be able to make small changes. The, the the people you need to influence are the stakeholders there because they are the ones that are going to decide the 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 project delivery times, what needs to be done, and they're going to be making the big decisions that actually set the scene for how much technical debt is created. All that the developers can do and all that the testers can do is decide where that technical debt is going to be. So yeah, they can make some decisions, but all they're going to be doing is kind of rearranging things there. The most fruitful thing is to engage with the stakeholders there, and they're not going to be making technical debt. They're not going to be making decisions that create technical debt just for the fun of it. They're under lots of pressure for business, but they perhaps, if they're aware of the consequence of the technical debt, they can make better informed decisions there. So everybody ends up as a winner there.
Okay. I think with due interest to time, we will have the questions stopped here. I think we had just had one other thing, if I can cover it in 1 minute.
Mhm.
What review or validation process do we need to avoid new debts?
Okay, so in my book there, I talk about a workshop process there of actually raising awareness of it, and in this process there, you show people actually how they make decisions around their emotions there, and you also go through a change management process there. In order to do that, though, you need to get engagement from the stakeholders because they will ultimately do it there. So you can manage these things. It's quite a big involved process though. But I think the important thing also to realize is that technical debt is not necessarily a bad thing. Technical debt does allow you to do things that you could not otherwise do. So it's this trade-off there. And I feel that for most organizations, they they they're getting that trade-off wrong and they're creating too much technical debt there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I
Thank
think
you very
there was a
much.
lot. There was a lot that we discussed and shared about technical debt. In today's run of delivering, I think we miss or we do not have specific time and sprints to pick up the technical debt. But thank you so much for overrunning this thing, saying emotions decide a lot about it. And thanks for bringing all the techniques, which is sequential trade off. Thank you so much for being
Thank you.
with us.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you very much.